My name's Monk Rowe for the Phileas Jazz Archive. I'm very, very pleased to have Wendy Oxenhorn with me today. And you've presented a bit of a challenge as far as an introduction because you've done an awful lot in your life. So I came up, I don't know why I saw this, but I'm going to call you the Red Cross for veteran jazz and blues musicians. How's that?
And roots and R&B, soul and rock and roll too, we
Right.
do.
That is sort of one of my questions we'll get to, but you were a co-founder and founding director of the Jazz Foundation. Um, and I want to start right off with, can you come up with a couple adjectives that describe that experience of from the very get-go when you arrived at this foundation to where you are now? How would you describe the experience?
Oh, adjectives. Thrilling, challenging, exciting, creative.
I had written down a couple, and you had two that I wrote down because I was just trying to put myself in your position. Um, was there ever melancholy involved?
Um, the melancholy came from two sources. One, how I even got the position and what I had been doing before that actually caused them to stand up and shake my hand at the job interview and say, "You're it."
Hmm.
I um I had an interesting introduction to jazz. I when from the time I was a little kid, I loved blues. I just loved blues and Billie Holiday, Frank Sinatra kind of jazz. Um, and I used to listen with a transistor radio and swing on the swings and sing my heart out. My biggest wish when I was like 10 was to be a Raylette, because my parents used to love Ray Charles and listen. And my mother one day like looked at me and she goes, "Wendy, you can never be a Raylette." And I was like, "What?" She goes, "You're white." And it was the first time in my life that I even realized that I wasn't, part of that club. And I remember being devastated, because that's really like that's where I related. Those are the people I related to. That music was what I related to. I started out life as a ballerina. And, when you dance, the only reason that you need to dance is because of music. I grew up, even though I was a classical ballerina, I grew up watching Soul Train on Saturdays, trying to learn to dance like that, you know. But anyway, it's
May
just
I
it's just
may I ask, were there any black dancers in your ballet uh, school and early career?
it's a great question. There were only two. There were only two in the entire school. And it was a very white business. And as a result, it was something I never felt comfortable in that world, you know. But I loved to dance, and ballet was what was open to me. That was the only thing that I was given at that time, you know. And then I had a knee injury, and I think it's a well-known story that I was told I would never dance again,
Hmm.
and that if I tried, I'd be crippled by the time I was 30. So I ended up calling a suicide hotline. And I started getting friendly with the counselor and I started asking how she was. And of course, I ended up working there 3 days later. And by my having to save other people who were in depression, it saved me. And that's how I got my start in this world of doing good and helping those who suffer.
Before we leave that earlier in your life topic, can you describe the difference between, swinging on a swing with a transistor radio and watching Soul Train, and I would imagine you're moving to it. How you move to that music is seems to be fairly intrinsic and obvious. I mean, there's a groove there. So when you do ballet, the movement is not so obvious, and it's coming
Very
from a
different
yeah,
groove.
it's coming from a choreographer as well. And
Yeah.
the reason this popped into my head is for a short time we took our daughters to a dance instructor, and she would put on warm-up music and then have them do movements, warm-up movements that had no relationship to the music. And so it used to irk me. Yet I realized I'm not schooled in that particular approach. So was ballet difficult for you in that the reaction to the music was not so obvious? I guess that was a long intro to a short question.
Well, here's the thing. The kind of music that you dance to in ballet can be gorgeous, Sibelius and Mahler, and there are incredible Eric Satie. There are incredible composers that can move you, and the kind of movement that you make, it's going to be obviously far different, but there is a great beauty and a great expression in doing something slow and bird-like. You can there's beauty in slowness and in the swan, okay? But Saturday morning on Soul Train, like that was it. That was like I wanted that. And, I used to get in trouble in my ballet classes because, I would try and do little things that just brought that into it. I would always get in trouble. But anyway, so when we talked about melancholy, so by the time I got to the Jazz Foundation job interview, I had become a blues man. I started playing blues in the train stations of New York City with an old man from Mississippi. And it was the greatest gift since my ballet. It was the first thing that I threw myself into. I was mending my heart over a heartbreak, and it was a musician who one of his instruments um, was the harmonica. So it was sitting on his table, and one day we were listening to Sugar Blue, and I picked it up and I started and he goes, baby, you got something, and it was like, I got bit by that. I would get on the trains, the express train from 96th Street to 14th Street while I was a single parent, while my kids were in school. And I would play between the cars so I wouldn't disturb anyone. I'd have Muddy Waters on, in my headphones, and I would just wail like outside in the tunnel that connects the cars. So I'd be bouncing up and down, holding on with one hand and just, practicing my heart out. And then I met the old man, and that was it.
Nice.
I couldn't have been happier, and I started making enough money. I produced a little CD for us from our live recordings, and I started making enough money to support it. I was making like 800 a week off the books.
Ooh.
Yes, not too many little sidemen in New York can do that in the
Yeah.
train station. Back in time for dinner, didn't even need a babysitter.
Wow. So did you
Okay.
have the little suitcase with all the different keys for the harmonica?
No, I could never afford all those harps. I could afford one in the key that he was in, and there was only like, one or two songs that I could do. Because of it. But really, his purpose in inviting me to play with him, because at first I was just terrible. His purpose was to have a little blonde in a dress going to pass the tip bucket. And then when I became like an asset and I recorded us and I was his CD partner and I was selling the CDs for 12 bucks a piece, we started rolling in the dough. And that's when, my playing got much better. I would take this, wailing solo we would have like 50 people in the train station. This was just before 9/11 when people still gathered. And I would go sell the CDs while the song was still going on. I'd take my solo, and while we were in an up moment, I'd start selling the CDs and passing the tip bucket before the crowd dispersed. So I knew how to raise money. Okay.
So did
That's
you,
why the foundation, that's why the Jazz Foundation
I
hired
was going
me.
to say, did you put that on your resume?
No,
Played
they
blues in the
knew my,
subway with.
that's too funny. No, I had a very successful, I had my 15 minutes of fame with another charity for the homeless,
Mhm.
selling the street news, the newspapers that allowed the homeless to work and buy their own food. And that was successful and they loved that. But when I told them, I play blues in the train station with an old man from Mississippi, that was when the guy stood up and shook my hand and said, "You're it." But he forgot to tell me that I was the only person who showed up for the job interview.
Wow, in New York City, that's you're the only person, huh?
Yes, they advertised it in Psychology Today,
Oh,
um, which I don't know why. Maybe it was all they could afford, but they offered me 50 big ones. And I was very excited. I was a single parent. I had another part-time job that I did besides the train station blues. And when I left, they called me back a week into the job at the Jazz Foundation, said, "We want you back. We'll start you at 100,000." And that was huge money back then. That was huge money to me, 20 years ago, whatever. And I could not even think about it. I was already bit by the mission of the foundation. The only thing was that when I started working at the foundation, which I think I found out there was only $7,000 in the bank. So there was no way they could pay me the 50 big ones.
hmm.
So it was really starting from scratch. The foundation was founded by a few jazz enthusiasts, including Billy Taylor, Herb Storfer, uh, Bill Wurtzel, and a few really, Sandy Jordan, which was Clifford Jordan's wife. And I hope I'm not leaving out too many people, but Jimmy Owens. And the only issue was that they were just, people that were well intended, but they had never run an organization before. And they turned it halfway through. It was just going to be an archival organization, sort of like what you do. And they turned it into an emergency fund because Vishnu Wood and Jamil Nasser and Jimmy Owens came to them and said, "There's all these musicians having terrible issues. We need to do something." And that's how it turned into it. But I think in 4 years, they'd only helped 35 musicians. And they were going under because Herb Storfer was 80 now and he could no longer do this. So they put an ad in the paper and in the magazine, and there you go. So
Was there a sort
they,
of I'm going to use the word triage when a person was presented or came to you or was brought to the organization? Was there an assessment like what do we need immediately and what could be the long-term plan for this person?
honestly, they just said, "Here are the keys to the office. You're going to have to be a one-man band because we don't have money to hire anyone else."
So when you decided $7,000 isn't going to go too far.
Yeah, I had to start working for
Yeah.
free if we were going to
Um,
help anyone.
did it occur to you that maybe the best way to support these veteran musicians who had some troubles was to reach out to the musicians who were doing fairly well and it could help out?
Wait, say that again. Sorry,
Well, I'm
there's maybe
wondering,
someone's using a
you know,
drill.
you you had the came up with the Great Night in Harlem, and how did that idea come to you?
Oh, well, I knew we needed a lot of money. I started seeing that the musicians were really in a bad way. And because they were so proud, no one would ever come and ask for help. You had to hear someone was having a hard time through someone else. So I knew nothing really about jazz. And I didn't have, I mean, I left school for the ballet. I left school after ninth grade. That was the highest education I had. So there weren't like research studies I did on helping people. I had not become a licensed social worker, but my time at the hotline, the suicide hotline, I had been counseling for years and I had a few other organizations, not just helping the homeless, but kids and people in rough situations. So I had a lot of counseling experience and I was very intuitive. So it was easy to know how to help the musicians because they thought like me. They were all living on the fringe for years. They were very resourceful. They were creative, and they always thought outside the box. So finding ways to help them was so easy for both of us because they knew I was very clear in the fact that I had been at one point living on $8 a day with two kids. When I was starting my charities in the past, I didn't have family money to back it up. I was just going raw, just like they do for the love of what they do. So they could see that I really genuinely had been in their position and I really understood. So I was able to say to them, I'm buying you groceries today and you're going to accept it because, and then we would laugh later that night when I'd call them and they'd be eating tuna fish sandwiches when they had just had a jar of pickles in the fridge and a bunch of ketchup packets, and the only reason I knew was because I would go to their homes. They never tell you anything, like really. So the only way to really discover how someone's doing would be to go visit them. And you'd have a great excuse. I was in the hood taking care of someone else, which was good. That meant that I'm not there just for them, so they don't feel like they're a charitable case. I was there and I just wanted to, we had such a great talk on the phone. I just wanted to come by and say hello. And I remembered you said sardines you love. So I brought some, and door open and we would talk for an hour. And then I would just happen to get myself something from the fridge, say, oh, I'll be right. I'm just going to grab something, some water or ice cubes or whatever. And then I'd get to see what was in it. And then I'd get to really go shopping and we'd get to make a list of what they wanted. And I would tell them I went through the same thing and someone did this for me. So I'm just passing it on and I'm going to do it for you. And it was just, there was a soul connection that was truly magical and beautiful. And what was so ironic was a lot of these people were the people that my love affair that he used to take me to hear. These were his idols. So I learned about some of them before, even though I knew nothing about jazz. I learned by going, you know and hearing being taken to hear somebody and then the most circular amazing experiences with me ending up getting to save the very person that we had gone to hear who my soulmate had loved and was in awe of, and me, this little single parent with two kids, end up being able to have the honor and privilege of, makes me tearful, to think about who these people were. These were the pioneers of the music. These were the original freedom fighters. These are the people who found a way out of the racism. Because in Europe, these people in America, you're talking about the amount of racism we had while they were in the height of their careers. And in Europe, they were kings and queens. These were brilliant people who recreated an entire and reinvented an existence for them where they got to be acknowledged for who they truly are and the beauty they contributed to this world, you know?
Did you
And then you
ever
go back, I'm sorry, go
did
ahead.
you ever get involved in trying to recover? This is a legal uh, avenue, sort of trying to recover owed payments or royalties for things that they had written that they had been cheated out of? Was that part of what you ended up doing?
It's funny you should put it that way, but there was really not much recourse. There were contracts they signed with labels, record companies for their own publishing that they could never get. I remember a musician telling me, a very famous label, when he said that he wanted his own publishing, the executive said to him, no, and I'm not going to use the N word, but he said, no N is going to ever have his own publishing while I'm alive. This is how it was when you recorded with someone like Frank Sinatra, the horn section, you got $300 for the gig, for the recording, and then there were no royalties on the vinyl that was sold. There was nothing else. So you got to pay your rent once. And then CDs were invented. There was nothing in contracts. CDs weren't invented yet. There was nothing to cover people. It would have been wonderful if there was a class action suit that could do something like that, but I don't think there was anyone interested. And if they were, I do know there were record labels would often try to buy out attorneys, just like in divorces, you hear of this, the husband, the rich husband goes to the lawyer the wife is using and does something to make it a conflict of interest for him to be able to represent her.
Yeah.
I think there had to be payoffs, things like that. I'm not going to assume, but it wasn't done. So what I would tell the musicians when they had a hard time accepting help from the Jazz Foundation was, think of this as all the money that you never got that you should have when you were cheated, by clubs that didn't pay properly or promoters that took advantage of you when you were on the road, all the hotels that should have been covered for you while you were touring, the food that should have been covered for you, and you come back almost breaking even from a European tour, that they were able to absolutely assimilate and say, okay, that I can do. It's beyond, and we know all the earlier racism. Everyone knows the clubs, the labels, the record companies. We know so many things that went down back then. Um, I there was one story that really stands out in my early moments, and I'll segue into the Great Night in Harlem and answer your question. But there was a legend who, I think it was Ron Carter, who came to me and said, I ran into someone at the airport, and he didn't have a seeing eye cane, but he was blind as a bat. He really couldn't see where he was going. And this is like a serious legend recorded with everyone. He said, I asked him where he was coming back from, and he had been in Greece for one night for $500. And Ron Carter took him in his car and drove him 2 hours back to his home in Jersey or Pennsylvania. And he said, you gotta get in touch with this guy. He needs us. So I called him and we started speaking. And he said, he goes, I don't need any help, lady. So we got to the subject of, how is he eating? How is he shopping? He can't drive. So he lived a block away from a 7-Eleven, and he was drinking those cans of Ensure and M&Ms, eating M&Ms. So I found out he'd been doing that for over a year. So I suggested, because we didn't have a lot of money then, but I suggested Meals on Wheels. And he was like, I don't need any kind of help, lady. And he hung up on me. And I was like, oh man. So I called him back the next day and I said, listen, I said, I worried about you all night. I didn't sleep. I said, we got tight on the phone. We were comparing stories. I was telling him some of the old man train station blues stories, and we were laughing. And I said, I'm going to be worrying about you now. He goes, and I was talking into his machine. He didn't pick up. And all of a sudden, the receiver picks up. He goes, Wendy, I don't want you to worry about me. I said, well, then I'm going to ask you one favor in our relationship. Would you promise me? Would you try just once? Would you, this place delivers good meals, like twice a day, lunch and dinner. Just try it once, okay? Just so that I'll sleep, you know. So he agreed. And he called up later the next day after they made their first visit. And he was just like over the moon. He said it'd been so long since I'd had like real food. And he was just like so full of energy and happiness. And he loved the woman who delivered it. She sat and talked with him. He had no company, you know. And after that, like his energy was coming back. And I introduced him. I asked him to do a gig with this young musician. And they got tight. And before we knew it, young musicians were asking him to sit in at clubs. So he would guest star. So he was making money. They were getting paid more because they had the famous name and they were becoming like family. So this became a little thing that started happening with some of the elders, you know. So many beautiful things. So, okay, great night in Harlem. I really didn't know anything about jazz. In fact, I can tell you that up until a couple of years ago, I mean, it's so embarrassing, but I thought, um, I'm not even going to say it, but there was a great legend who was a piano player. I mean, who was a saxophonist, and I thought he was a piano player. Okay. I thought he played piano. Okay. So just there you go. All right. So I wanted to learn about jazz. And I watched the Gene Bach documentary, A Great Day in Harlem. So I figured I'll learn about everyone. And I, I thought to myself, wouldn't it be incredible to get all the living legends together and do a great night in Harlem and do it in Harlem? So I thought of the Apollo Theater, but it was like $15,000 at the time to rent it. And no one had done jazz or blues there in like, I think it was 30 or 50 years. So I went back to my board and I told them this great idea. And they said, Wendy, first of all, we're not concert producers. You're not a concert producer. We can't do this. Plus, we don't have $15,000. So I said, okay, listen, um, why don't we look into getting someone who maybe could do that? Who knows how to do that. So we interviewed one person and she wanted $100,000 to do it. So we were like, okay, let's do this the Wendy way, okay? Like the single parent Wendy way. So I said, do we know anyone with money? And Herb Storfer, the original founder who I love, he was the 80-year-old who could no longer help the musicians. He would, by the way, pull money out of his pocket. If someone had a heart attack, they'd come to his apartment. That's how the Jazz Foundation used to run. And he would give them 500 for their rent. The guy was a saint. And they said, well, we know, he said, I know one rich person. And he said, my neighbor. And he loves the little events we have in my apartment. I said, okay, good. What is he? He goes, I think he's a merchant banker. So I got in touch with the guy the next day. We went to lunch and I told him what was happening. I told him where we were, the kind of need, these great musicians. Turned out that he was learning blues guitar on his own. He loved the music. He loved the whole idea. And he goes, I'll give the $15,000 for the rent of the Apollo. I was like, woohoo. So we were on our way. Now, there was no way I could do this alone. So I think I went to George Wein's Festival Productions and asked, because George Wein had known of what we were doing. He never thought the idea would go well because he said it's going to be a bottomless pit. These guys can't, their medical costs alone would be, nobody would have enough money for that. When I told him what we were doing, what was happening, the musicians that were getting helped, he was like, this is incredible. I'm going to give you my top producer. And he gave us Rick White, which was amazing, and Dan Melnick. And and then some of the guys on our board, Bob Cranshaw, Jimmy Owens, they started reaching out to musicians. Um, at the time, I asked if anyone knew anyone famous. Someone had the number for Bill Cosby's agent. So I left word. Um, I remember a week later, I get a call, uh, and I hear this guy in this voice that's familiar go, Wendy? I was like, yes. He goes, this is Kaz. Okay, this is before anyone knew what he was up to
Right.
in his spare time. But to us in that time, that he was a big star. He had the Cosby Show. You know, he was like a big, that was like an A-list name. That was like Whoopi Goldberg to us, you know. So we got Cos. He said he'd do it. And it just started snowballing. And we had only 9 weeks to put it together. I told the board I have to hire someone because I cannot continue to do this alone. I was doing the emergencies, I was doing the bookkeeping, which I was terrible. I was raising the money, I was starting to recruit a board, I was doing the events, I was doing the marketing. It was insane. So they told me we could get an intern. So I contacted a friend of mine, and he was teaching African studies in oh, I forgot the university, Adam Gusso, but he was an amazing guy. He also played harmonica with an old blues band. And he sent one of his students who turned out to be the most brilliant young woman. She looked like she could be a little church girl from Atlanta. And it turned out she ended up leaving us to become an attorney. She got a full ride to Northeastern. She was just incredible. Lauren Roberts. And the two of us in 9 weeks put this together. And 13 days before our first great night in Harlem, we had, oh, I think it was over 100 of the living legends at the time coming together. Freddie Hubbard, I mean, everyone. Um, And 9/11 happened 13 days before. So we thought, okay, no one's going to show. The house was packed. We had a 4 hour concert and we raised $350,000.
That's
So
amazing.
we were in business.
I've been in company with some of these people like Milt Hinton, and there's something about their glow. They're 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 like magnets, and
They're incredible.
people want to stand next to them because they make you feel
Well,
better.
it's the
Yeah.
vibration that they, the frequency that they vibrate from. You know, they say I can't remember if it was Leonard Cohen or Bob Dylan said that the music is up there and we just bring it down. You know, musicians bring it down. And I do believe that with all my heart, you know. Those are they are healers, you know. The musicians are the healers of the world. I can't imagine getting through life. And I always used to say that to our audience. You know, they were there when you fell in love and they were there when you got divorced, you know. The music is what got us through life. So it ended up becoming a very beautiful. It wasn't a job. It was a way of life. It was like a sacred task to usher and transition these people at a time in life, at an age where they had been forgotten. The phone didn't ring. They couldn't do 3 hour, three sets anymore. There was incapacitation. No one had money or insurance for doctors. You know, once you're of Medicare age, you know, it's generally too late. You can have advanced stages of cancer. Don't forget there was smoking for years in the clubs. You know, all sorts of things that affected their health, you know. Oh, sorry. That's another creditor.
Do you consider yourself an optimist?
Oh, yes.
I thought you'd say, "Oh yes." This is a little off topic, but does your optimism include the wider view of our country at the moment?
Ooh, bigger question. let's put it this way. I believe that there are consequences for all actions. And this country was founded on not just racism, but murder, but stolen lives. Stolen, I mean, this was based on genocide. 10 million natives who had been here for 100,000 years were murdered because we had a gun and they didn't, because we did not adapt to their ways. Instead, we forced our way on them. And ironically, under the guise of Christianity, that has always been the way of early America. And then there was slavery, not even offering people a chance to come to a new country and make a living for you and your family. Think of the mindset. It was to capture other human beings, bring them here over an ocean. In those days, think about that. Whether they lived or died, and then sell them off and use them as property and beat them and kill them and rape them. I'm sorry to list it so in such an upsetting manner, but that was the truth of how industry grew. And as Danny Glover always taught me, it was the cotton gin, the cotton mill, that machine that is what is responsible for slavery. Mass production is what caused all that to happen. Again, but really the thing that comes before that is greed. What I love is indigenous people believed that greed was a mental illness, an affliction. If you ever hunted or took more than what your family or you needed, that was considered mental illness. They worried about that tribal member if he was ever taking more than what he needed. Land could never be owned. I mean, look at the way this country developed. And if you think it's much different now, it's not. Look what's happening. People are being kidnapped off the streets. People who 4 years ago during the pandemic, who were the heroes of the pandemic? It was immigrant workers were delivering the groceries. Immigrant workers were delivering Amazon so people could stay home and save their lives. They were putting their life on the line. Who does the work that no one else is willing to do in America? And now you're putting that level of fear into our communities, killing citizens who are standing up for them. I mean, it's beyond insane. So to be optimistic in a moment like this is like, it's the original, I'm sorry, but it's the original pain I had growing up of what happened in slavery, what happened in this country, what happened to indigenous people. As a kid, we learned about that in school, and it broke my heart then. And I think that was part of my need to want to help anyone from those communities that suffered from that original feeling of like, what could I do? I couldn't do anything from 200 years ago or 100 years ago or 60 years ago, but maybe, there was a part of me that,
Well, you're certainly made good on your passion and your humanity. And am I correct that you're still doing it in your new location?
I ended up, so after this was sort of taken out of my hands, um, I was like, it was the beginning of the pandemic, and like there was such a need. Musicians, I was having 10 musicians a day calling me. So of course, I want you to know musicians still call me and I still counsel and I'm still there for them. And now if it becomes issues with money, I'll counsel them and soothe the soul, but then I will hand them over, of course, to our head angel, Elisa, at the Jazz Foundation, who's the head of the social work department, and they take care of the rent, they take care of their doctors. It's been amazing. Joe Petroselli's done a brilliant job, and they're doing they're doing it their way. But I was like left without purpose. It wasn't, a job that I was giving up. It was a way of life that I had designed to fit all my greatest neuroses. And that's how it worked, my need to care for the suffering, my purpose in life, what gave me joy in this world. That's what gives me happiness, So it's purely selfish on my part. So Ukraine had just had Russia invade. And I think it was 5 or 6 months into the war there, the invasion there. Um, and I was so tired of hearing about it, I decided I was going to go to Poland and gather the refugee women and children that were now flooding into Poland and start like a 12-step like meetings in churches and things to get them to be able to find each other and start creating situations where maybe we could have a work network. I contacted the mayor of Warsaw. I was supposed to meet with him. And when I got there, I met a young woman who was driving into Ukraine with food for orphans, for orphanages. The Red Cross was not going into Ukraine. And I was like, okay, well, I'm already here. I'll just go into Ukraine. And we drove in and we went to Lviv, and there were cafes that were open and magnificent people and musicians playing in the street. And I was like, this doesn't feel like war. This is incredible. And so we started going deeper and deeper into Ukraine, and we were given a mission that we couldn't say where we were going. We had to hand them our driver's licenses to be photocopied. We had to swear that we were under their law that we couldn't speak about what we were bringing or who we were bringing it to. And we'd done gasoline to the front, we'd done protective weaponry, like bulletproof vests, helmets. People were fighting in sneakers. Fathers and sons were fighting in sneakers and jeans with kitchen knives. There was no ammunition for a lot of people. It was insane. So we brought this. It turned out that we ended up going to Kiev, and we were bringing, which I didn't know till after. Um, we went into this building, this empty building, and there was a smell, the likes of which I'll never forget. I couldn't even bring in the boxes. I had to wait outside, and a young man who spoke English brought this older woman in her 70s out to me, and he explained to me, because he spoke English, no one else did, and I certainly didn't speak Ukrainian, even though I found out on that trip that my people were Ukrainian. They were all from the cities in Ukraine. They weren't Russian. So that was an amazing thing. I was the first family member after 100 years of escaping to go back and be on the soil, which was very profound. Very spiritual experiences happened there. So I found out that we had brought forensic equipment, and Merrick Garland was coming to Ukraine the next day to teach them how to document war crimes. And those were the bodies of people that had been at the Mariupol power plant underneath. Remember, the Russian army wouldn't let them out. There were 2,000 or 3,000 people stuck, and people had died. They'd been living with the dead before Russia came and took them as prisoners of war. But the bodies that were returned, that they got back, had to be identified for the loved ones and as war crimes. And that's the equipment we brought that day, to identify them so their families would know if they were still here or not, or if they were in Russian prisoner camps at the time being tortured. It was insane. But so anyway, talk about feeling a sense of purpose. And because I had no language, what I found, all I had to do was hug someone. So this tough woman who was going to be identifying bodies, and she was a lioness. She was the most magnificent, youthful, incredible, powerful woman. And when this man was telling me what it was that we were delivering, I started getting tears, and I looked at her and I just hugged her. And this powerhouse of a woman, tough as nails, we started sobbing together. And we did this prayer for the souls, And even though they didn't understand English, they knew just what we were doing. And it was an amazing experience. And when I got back from Ukraine, I was walking in the streets of New York, and there were at least three people for every block that I saw with my antenna, for suffering that I saw needed help. And I realized you don't have to go halfway around the world to do good in this world. It's right here in front of you. So I started my own little anonymous personal charity just from my own little measly whatever. Because not everything needs money. Sometimes you can see a kid sitting against a building who's homeless with his little sign, and you start talking to him, and before you know it, you realize he's a fentanyl addict. He doesn't want to be. And by the time the relationship is over, he's going to meetings and he's in NA and he's getting sober. That didn't cost money, except for the lunch you bought him and maybe the clothes. So I'm just saying that everyone is their own charity, and that's the basis of this. It's just called ripples of kindness and love, and you do it yourself. And it could be seeing a woman in line for a bus who's losing her hair and it's balding on top, and you just go up to her and tell her that color of her hair is so fabulous. You want to know what she uses. What color is that? What clairol? And she'll tell you, oh, it's natural. And
Oh,
she'll start crying because she was embarrassed to go out. She's feeling like she's losing her hair, and I'll tell her how beautiful she is. And before we know it, we're hugging each other. And you can change life right here, right in front of you, when you choose. Doesn't have to be every time, just when you choose, when the spirit calls you to do something nice. Or the guy who cleans up those guys who clean up the streets now in New York, and you go and thank them for their service and say, like, this city is sparkling because of you. You're doing such good. Thank you. And you start talking and find out they're sober 9 weeks, and you encourage them, and you find out what their name is, and they become people, not
yeah.
this guy cleaning up. There's so many little things we can do that don't take money, but I love doing the things that do take money. Love helping someone in a way that will change their life. So, I
You
have to figure out how to get donations at some point because I've run out.
you must really sleep well at night, Wendy. And I'd like to wrap this up with an observation and then a quote. Um, Usually, when I research for an interview and I look up a musician's information, there'll be lists of let's say Milt Hinton, and they'll list all the records he played on and all this and a discography, so to speak. Well, you have your own discography with the recognitions and the awards that you have received, and I'm extremely impressed by what you've done. I never thought I would be quoting an actor from The Sopranos in a interview, but you're probably familiar with this quote from Michael Imperioli, who said, um, Wendy gets an immense amount of joy from helping people. I'm a Buddhist. In my religion, we call that a bodhisattva, someone who actually dedicates their lives to serving and helping others. That's who she is. So thank you for
So
being who you
beautiful.
are and taking the time out today to share it with us.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this and for all the archives I've been watching, and they've been incredible. You get moments of people where you don't usually, see who they are. And I just did want to say that for anyone watching who has money to donate, please give to the Jazz Foundation of America. Every time a musician calls me and something's happening, they'll pay their rent. People that, I mean, oh my goodness, we never say who we help because there are pride issues, but there are musicians that said publicly who we helped. So I can say Roberta Flack, Sinead O'Connor, you know, Abby Lincoln, and you can only imagine the level of people we helped who didn't say it publicly. So I just want to say, please give to the Jazz Foundation. Joe Petroselli and the gang are doing an amazing job. keeping it up. The money needs to come in order to keep helping, and they are helping, all those numbers of musicians, and still with the same, there's always, I know Elisa, I don't know the other social workers anymore, but Elisa and is a very loving spirit, so please help continue to make it possible for these people who gave us so much beauty and are very proud people who never, still to this day, very rarely ask for help for themselves.
All right. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I'll just pause this and we'll say our goodbyes.
Okay, I had one other thing.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to say yes, that happiness, my happiness does come from helping others that are suffering. But I have also learned, and this never would have happened had I not been relieved of my 17-hour days from this crazy job and this crazy foundation that I built. But I want to say that what I learned was that when you when you live for yourself, when you give to yourself, when you make time to live your life in a way that makes you happy, just the way the musicians did, and the way I did all these years, but there is another level. There is another layer to the onion when you peel, and the glorious selfish enlightenment is a gift. It's okay to do for yourself. We live in a society where, oh, the noble people who give their life to service. There is nothing wrong with living your life selfishly and in a way that makes you happy and choosing things that make you happy. And I say this because if everyone in this world lived according to their heart and according to doing what makes you happy, there would be no war. Who would want to give up that life? Who would be so miserable from resentment that they have to be violent, that they have to be angry? They'd be too happy. So, like, the way I see it is get a puppy and follow your heart, and there will be peace in the world. So there's my optimism, okay, for
Thank
this moment in the world.
That was a beautiful coda to our conversation and a wonderful quote.
Much love,
All right.
Monk.
Thank
You're an
you.
amazing guy, and thank you. Thank you for what you do.
All right.
And thanks for this opportunity.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.